Hi everyone and welcome back to the Shack. Last year I posted up this video about the Pi 1541 and Epic's Fastload cartridge and asked, is this the only cartridge you'd ever need for your Commodore 64? Many people agreed that it was a really cool device, especially considering the price, and many pointed out other cartridges that they thought were better placed to take that #1 crown. If you were one of those people who said, no, you should look at the Ultimate 2 Plus cartridge from Gideon's Logic, it's amazing, then you weren't alone, and one of our lovely viewers, Jeffrey Phipps, sent us a significant donation to put towards one of those cartridges so we could see for ourselves. Now, this was last November, and as you may have expected, there were none in stock, but we added ourselves to the waiting list and, well, waited. And waited. And waited. And then, in May this year, we got an in-stock alert from Gideon's Logic, but not about the Ultimate 2 Plus cartridge. This was an alert for the Ultimate 64 Elite, a replacement mainboard solution for the Commodore 64 that does everything the Ultimate 2 Plus cartridge does, but also with some other cool features, and of course, it fits inside a C64 case. So, did we order one? You bet we did. Here at the Shack, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the sponsor for this video, PCBWay. They help us out with all of our PCB fabrication needs and make fantastic boards at amazingly competitive prices. And it's not only PCBs that are on the menu. Apart from other fabrication services like CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication and injection moulding, PCBWay also have a great projects library of cool stuff to build from people all around the world. Oh, and if you don't like waving a soldering iron about, they can even assemble your PCBs for you. That's the PCB way. Right, on with the show. And here it is, and it's a beautifully constructed piece of hardware, refreshingly similar to a C64 shortboard in that the ports and sockets are in the same places, so it just looks right. And then of course you've got the juxtaposition with this Altera Cyclone 5 FPGA and this Xilinx CPLD which power the beast. You're then further thrown off course from the it's only an emulator opinion by these ZIF sockets which allow you to put in actual SID chips, and therefore you're getting the real deal when it comes to music and sound effects. The piece of the C64 puzzle that is the most difficult to emulate fully and to everyone's satisfaction. You could put in a SID replacement like the ARM SID or the Nano Swin SID, but there's really no point as the onboard emulation of the SID chip is pretty spot on too. There's an ESP32 on here too, so hopefully we can expect some sort of Wi-Fi shenanigans at some point, and we've got HDMI, LAN and USB ports over here where the user port would normally be. And if you really want to plug in a printer, you can get an extension user port on a cable too. We've opted for the internal speaker also, which should provide all of our mechanical disk drive noises to further complete the illusion. But before we can use this, we need to house it in a case and keyboard, and it just so happens that I have this old C64C case lying around in need of a bit of work. There are some scuffs and scrapes, so we'll need to repair that as best we can, and then we'll give the whole thing a nice paint job and then take the Ultimate 64 Elite for a test ride. So first of all, I want to address these nasty little blemishes which look like soldering iron burns, or perhaps where a cable has rested against the case and there's been a chemical reaction with the plastic. Yep, that's what I'm going for in this case, but whatever it was, we need to smooth them out. A good few minutes with our flexible light sanding block and we've taken out most of the raised plastic. Just need to fill in the dips, and for that I'm using some good old-fashioned 2-part milliput. This will set rock hard and we can then sand to a nice finish. In doing this we're removing the slight texture of the case, but that shouldn't be a problem because we're going to be painting the whole thing anyway, and I promise you it won't be mustard yellow. We'll give the whole thing a good clean in the sink too, to get rid of any residual dirt and oils in preparation for the painting. And we've remembered to take out the little LED before it too gets covered in paint. Well, with the filling and sanding looking, well, okay, I'm not the best at this sort of thing, but it does look much better than it did before. A quick few blasts with the old spray can and a few coats of clear coat on top, and we end up with this, and I think that looks pretty good, certainly befitting of the Ultimate 64 board, which is all dark and moody like. So let's pop the board in, and while we're here we'll pop in a real 6851 SID chip because I have one lying around, not because I can tell the difference, I can't. The board is entirely jumperless, so should detect the inserted chip and set the pin voltages correctly. With the board in place, we'll get the keyboard and LED installed back in the top half of the case and then put this back together. Well, I think that looks absolutely beautiful, and there's only one thing left to top off the aesthetics, popping in this Ultimate 64 Elite badge. Well, I'm going to admire that for a moment and then let's get it plugged in and switched on. All of the functions of the Ultimate 64 Plus Elite are triggered by the nicely named multi-button on the side, which is a press and release affair. A short press when the machine is off will power it up, a short press when it's on will bring up the on-screen menu, and a long press and hold will power down the machine again. It also does other things in combination with some key presses, such as trigger the freeze function on some cartridges. Now, when first turning on the machine, you're presented with this little disclaimer that informs you that for copyright reasons, there are no system ROMs included by default. Bringing up the menu with a short press on the multi button, we get a navigation screen where we can see the flash disk, which is where ROMs and cartridges are flashed and stored, a temporary RAM disk, which is cleared on each reboot, our USB stick or sticks if we have more than one, and we can see the network address assigned by our router to the Ultimate 64's internal network LAN port. I've put the ROMs we need onto a USB stick along with a few test titles, so let's go ahead and follow the instructions on screen to set the basic, kernel and character ROMs. Then we'll reboot the machine and we land at a very familiar screen. Pressing the multi button again to get back into the main navigation pane, there's only one other option on the screen, F3 Help, so let's press that. And that gives us much more to go on because we can see that apart from the help with navigation, we can see there are two further menus we can access with F2 and F5. So let's start with F2, which initiates the configuration menu. Now there's a lot in here to absorb because this board is extremely adaptable, but let's take a logical approach and firstly see if the board has correctly detected the real SID chip we inserted. Here we can see that both sockets are disabled by default just in case the detection fails or gets it wrong. We don't want to be sending incorrect voltages to the chips. In socket 2 we can see the board has identified our 6581 chip correctly, so I'm going to enable that socket and save the changes to the flash memory. This board supports mixed SID chips, so if we wanted we could put an 8580 in the other socket and our sound would be a stereo mix of both. Also within the configuration menu are the audio mixer, which lets you control the volume of all the physical and virtual SID chips and the volume of the virtual disk drive and tape unit. We can also define all aspects of the onboard SID emulation called Ulti-SID, which through configuration can be set up to give you 8 concurrent emulated SID chips. I don't know anything that would use all of that, so if you know, drop me a note in the comments. In here are our C64 and cartridge settings, the ROMs we set earlier for our basic, kernel and character, and yes, this will also emulate the REU with up to 16 megabytes of memory. We'll need that later, and if you want to learn more about the C64's REU, the 8-bit guy recently did a great video on that which I've linked on the screen. The Ultimate 64 specific settings menu has lots of stuff that I haven't even touched the surface of, but there is one feature that really sticks out, and combined with the REU at 16 megabytes really turns the 64 into a bit of a beast. And that's the turbo control, which lets you crank the CPU up to, yes, 48 megahertz. That's a 48 times increase over the standard speed, and should make those CPU intensive games, such as those that attempt to draw in 3D, again I'm looking at you driller, to become actually playable. There's a real-time clock backed up by a CR2032 lithium battery, which through normal use should be good for several years. Here are our virtual printer settings showing where printed files will be saved and even the ink density. And there are tons of other settings, including a virtual modem for connecting BBS systems, a section where you can define how the user interface works, tape settings, drive settings, network settings. To go through all of these in detail would take hours. But don't despair, there is an excellent manual online which takes you through every feature of the board, if you've got the time and inclination to use and learn it all. And finally, in the user interface, there's a context-sensitive tool menu which you can invoke using F5. The options in here will change depending upon where you are in the file system. For example, the options to create things won't have anything in if you're on the network section, but if you're on the USB, you'll be able to create directories, blank disks, etc. So with all of that out of the way, believe me, it will take you only minutes to learn how to navigate through and find out where everything is, but many hours to understand everything this board can do. For now though, let's test if things are working by selecting this Arkanoid disk, and then we'll choose Mount and Run. This will reset the board, mount the disk, and then attempt to load it. And we can now hear that lovely mechanical drive noise, just as if we had a real 1541 drive sitting here. Wonderful. And as this is emulating a 1541 drive perfectly, it's not particularly quick, just like the real thing. But here it is after 2 minutes and 8 seconds in glorious HDMI with actual analog SID music with zero latency and everything 100% cycle accurate to a real C64. So of course the Ultimate 64 has a cartridge port on the back, right? So we could just plug in an Epix Fast Loader cartridge and enjoy the benefits of that. Or we could use a virtual cartridge, so let's do that. Rebooting the machine shows we now have the Epix Fast Load cartridge installed, and incidentally, loading Arkanoid with this cartridge in place only takes 45 seconds. Nice. You can install and use any cartridge for the C64 either virtually or through the actual cartridge slot. Now, our penultimate test will be the amazing Sonic the Hedgehog conversion that's recently taken the C64 world by storm. For this, we'll need to virtually install the REU memory expansion, and we'll set it to the maximum amount of memory, 16 megabytes. We'll then mount and run the first disk. After a while, we're asked if we want to use fast or compatible mode. We'll choose fast. And then we're asked if we want to read the manual or play the game. Just play the game. A little while on, we're asked if we want to load the full game into the REU and run immediately. We'll choose yes because that will mean no disk swapping later. The game then loads all of the first disk into the REU memory and asks us to insert the second disk, which we'll do and press fire. And there we have it, Sonic the Hedgehog running on the Ultimate 64 with real SID music, an emulated 1541 drive and 16 megabyte of memory expansion. And if you haven't played this Sonic the Hedgehog, it's an utterly amazing achievement for the C64. And again, watching the 8-Bit Guy's video on the REU will give you a real insight into just how much benefit the REU gives to the performance of the C64. Now, the final and perhaps most useful piece of functionality in the Ultimate 64 is that it has a built-in FTP server. So as long as you've got the machine plugged into your router, you can load up your FTP program, connect to the machine and drag and drop files, create directories, etc. without ever having to unplug the USB stick. Very handy indeed. So there we have it, the Ultimate 64 Elite board by Gideon's Logic. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you've got one of these, you don't really need anything else. Is it any better than the BMC 64 we built and reviewed last year? After all, that's a quarter of the price. Well, simply yes, because to all intents and purposes, this is a proper C64, and by that I mean that you can use real hardware on this, and because it's FPGA, you're getting the real hardware just in software form, and the inclusion of the options for real SID chips should please the purists. I really can't imagine myself using any other C64 in my collection after using this, apart from the one I built myself, of course. But if I keep that one in the shack, this Ultimate 64 is coming home with me to plug into my big telly. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If so, please like and subscribe. Your subscription really helps the channel to grow and helps with the gods of the YouTube algorithm. Please also ping the bell for notifications of new content. If you like the channel and would like to support us or have something to donate and see featured on the channel, please take a look at our website or our Ko-Fi page for details of how. There are links on the banner on the main channel page. Please leave your comments below. Do you have one of these boards? And if so, what do you think of it? We love to hear from you all. Right, until next time in the shack, it's goodbye from me.